You think hospitals are places of healing, but what if I told you that even after the last patient has left, some corridors never completely empty? There is something that doctors and nurses in medical facilities rarely discuss openly. Perhaps it is the fluorescent lights that are a little too loud, or the shadows that stretch further than they should. However, the stories I've heard from healthcare workers across the country, and their experiences will make you question everything you thought you knew about these so-called safe spaces. The first story comes from Dr. Sarah Chen, who experienced the impossible while doing her residency at Mercy General. Story 1. The patient who couldn't stay dead. It was 2:15 a.m. on January 15th, when the usual quiet hum of Mercy General's emergency department was disturbed by something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. As a first-year resident, I'd learned to tune out the constant buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Just another tired mechanical sound that matched the exhaustion of the graveyard shift. But that night, something felt different. I could sense it in my bones, even though I couldn't name it yet. Room 312 had been one of our quieter corners, usually reserved for patients waiting for ICU beds or short-term observation. Not exactly a high-traffic area, and certainly not somewhere you'd expect anything unusual. But Dr. Martinez, our attending that night, was hunched over the nurse's station, scribbling notes with an expression I'd never seen before. "Did you see him?" he asked quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. His voice wasn't scared, exactly, but there was something different about it, like he was trying to convince himself of something. "See who?" I glanced up from the chart I was reviewing. The guy from 312, his voice dropped even lower. I could swear I just saw him walking down the east corridor. "You know, the one who came in around midnight." I blinked hard. "Wait, didn't we pronounce him about 4 hours ago?" He nodded slowly, that strange, thoughtful look crossing his face. "Exactly. And yet, I swear, I saw him same clothes, same everything. But then he just vanished." I stood up, unsure how to process this. We'd all worked on that man, an elderly gentleman who'd been in a horrific car accident. The trauma was severe, the head injuries catastrophic. There was absolutely no way he could have survived, yet here we were, discussing him like he was still wandering our halls. "Are you absolutely sure?" I asked, though I wasn't even sure what I was asking, whether Dr. Martinez was losing his mind, or if something supernatural was actually happening here. "You're not the only one," he said, leaning closer. "I heard Jenny mention it earlier. She thought she saw him in the hallway too." Jenny was our most experienced night nurse, someone who never got rattled, never jumped at shadows. If she was seeing things. I walked toward room 312, my footsteps muffled by the thick hospital carpet. The door stood open, and as I approached, I peered inside. The bed was empty, sheets perfectly made, almost too perfect, like no one had ever been there at all. But I knew better. We'd all been in this room, 4 doctors, 3 nurses, and a respiratory therapist. We'd all witnessed the same thing. "Dr. Martinez," I called back toward the station. "The bed's empty." He walked over, his face unreadable. I checked earlier too. It was empty then as well, but people keep seeing him. Everyone who's been here tonight has seen him walking these halls. A chill ran down my spine, though I didn't want to acknowledge it. "Are you sure it's him? Could it be another patient?" He shook his head definitively. "It's him. No mistaking it, same walk, same everything. But no one knows where he's coming from." We both stood there, staring into that quiet room, and that's when I heard it, footsteps. Faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the main corridor. Slow, deliberate, like someone taking an evening stroll toward us. I turned quickly, but the hallway was completely empty. I shook my head, rubbing my temples. I wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories or hospital folklore, but this was something else entirely. "We need to check the security footage," I said, trying to find some logical explanation. "Maybe we're missing something obvious." Dr. Martinez nodded, and we headed to the security office, a small, dimly lit room tucked away in the back of the hospital. Roy, our grizzled security guard, looked up with mild confusion. "What's going on, folks?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "We need to see the footage from the corridor outside room 312. I said, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the unease creeping into my stomach. Roy pulled up the video feed. We watched the grainy black and white footage flicker across the screen. It was 2:10 a.m. just 5 minutes before. Dr. Martinez claimed to have seen our deceased patient walking the halls. The corridor was completely empty. Not a soul in sight. I held my breath, waiting for the moment when the figure would appear on screen, but nothing happened. The footage showed a perfectly still hallway, devoid of any movement whatsoever. "That's impossible," I muttered, my mind racing. "We all saw him. How can there be nothing here?" Roy didn't respond, but I could see the doubt creeping across his face. He rewound the footage to another timestamp. Same thing, empty hallway stretching out under those cold, sterile lights. I felt something heavy pressing on my chest, something I couldn't explain. There had to be a rational explanation, but in that moment, I couldn't find one. "Wait," Roy said suddenly, his finger hovering over the pause button. The frame froze. I squinted at the screen. There, in the far distance, standing near the stairwell, was a figure. Just a shadow, indistinct, but I could swear it was the man from room 312. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, and then, he simply wasn't there anymore. A cold shiver ran through me. "That wasn't real," I whispered. "That couldn't be real." "Did you see it too?" Roy asked, his voice barely audible. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I had actually seen. But something had happened, something that defied explanation. The silence in the security room was broken only by the sound of my racing heartbeat. I felt a sudden urge to leave, to walk away from this bizarre occurrence and pretend none of it had happened. But as I turned to go, Roy's voice stopped me cold. "You know what's really strange?" he said slowly. "Room 312 was sealed off after that mass casualty event 20 years ago. They never reopened it. The hospital doesn't even use that wing anymore." I turned to face him, my mind reeling. "What are you talking about? That doesn't make sense. I've been working here for months. Room 312 is still in use." "No," he interrupted. "It hasn't been operational in 20 years. After the fire, they sealed off that entire section. And 312. That's where the worst of it happened." I stood frozen, my thoughts a complete blur. What had we seen tonight? Who had we seen? Was it possible that the hospital had somehow forgotten something so fundamental, or had something far more unsettling been lurking in the shadows all along? Room 312 wasn't supposed to exist. But tonight, it had called us back, one way or another. Story 2. Code Blue for No One. The shift change at St. Mary's Medical Center was approaching, and the night had settled into that familiar quiet rhythm. Just the steady hum of machines and the soft shuffle of nurses. Shoes against linoleum. I'd been working in the ICU for over 20 years, long enough to know every sound, every pattern, every moment of chaos, and the many hours that felt like moving through fog. Around midnight, there's this particular stillness that hangs over the ward, like the entire hospital is holding its breath before dawn breaks. But that night felt different. Even the usual murmurs from the hallway seemed muffled, swallowed by walls that suddenly felt too thick, too isolating. Then came the announcement. "Code Blue, room 404. Code Blue, room 404. Echoing through the overhead speakers, cutting through the silence like a blade, my heart skipped. Room 404, there was no patient in that room. I paused, glancing at my colleagues. We all shared the same bewildered expression. Empty rooms weren't unusual in the IC. Sometimes patients got discharged, sometimes transferred, but there was always someone assigned. A code blue meant immediate life-threatening danger, and that urgent, heart-stopping announcement sent chills down my spine. I grabbed the emergency kit and rushed toward the room. Fluorescent lights flickering overhead as I moved down the corridor, casting strange shadows that seemed to stretch further than they should have. The lights had always been unreliable here, but tonight felt different. The shadows looked wrong, twisted, almost alive. When I reached room 404, it was exactly as expected, empty, no patient, no sign of recent admission. The bed was perfectly made, the heart monitor standing silently beside it, but the monitor was beeping. I stared at the screen, my breath catching. The unmistakable alarm of a code blue was blaring from this machine, sharp and insistent, like a cry for help that no one could answer. I quickly hit the intercom button. "Code blue, no patient present," I said into the device. "Need assistance immediately." Within moments my colleagues arrived, all of us standing in the doorway, staring at this empty room, while equipment pulsed with a life of its own. Machines blinked and hummed, as if mocking normalcy. The ventilator, hissing with no one to breathe for. Infusion pumps clicking in steady rhythm. The heart monitor fluctuating wildly. It was chaos inside an empty room. "Is someone playing a prank?" one of the nurses muttered, but uncertainty colored her voice. "No," I said, more certain than I felt. "Something's very wrong here." We rushed into the room, checking each piece of equipment for malfunctions, but everything appeared to be functioning normally. Too normally. The beeping continued, faster now, louder, and then I saw something that made every hair on my neck stand up. The monitors flickered once, twice, and then displayed something impossible. "Time of death, 11:59 p.m., appeared in bold letters across the screen. I froze. The wall clock showed 12:01 a.m. "Clear the room," I said, my voice rising, no longer the calm nurse, but someone trying to contain something I couldn't understand. We all stepped out, minds racing. No patient, no one to die, but the clock had been counting down. I glanced at the wall, watching the seconds. 12 hours, 1 minute, and 30 seconds. We stood there, staring at each other, completely bewildered by what had just happened. I had to know more. I left the team behind and headed to the old patient records in the nearby filing room, hands shaking as I flipped through thick paper files. The hospital had been here for decades, plenty of history to accumulate. Tucked in the back of a dusty filing cabinet, I found something unexpected. A folder marked Unsolved Cases, one I'd never seen before. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of papers inside. The first document was a death certificate for a patient who had died in room 404. March 3rd, 1993. Time of death, exactly midnight. I kept flipping. Another death, same room, same date, March 3rd, 1987. Time of death, midnight. Then another, and another. Each year, the same pattern. The records went back decades, and every single death had occurred at the stroke of midnight. A chill crawled up my spine as I tried to process what I was seeing. Then I found something else, a small handwritten note, barely legible. Full moon, always the full moon. I blinked, unable to believe what I was reading. I flipped back through the pages, checking dates. March 3rd, every year. And without fail, the deaths had occurred during the full moon. I could barely catch my breath. Tonight was the full moon, and it was March 3rd. I rushed back to the ICU, thoughts swirling. The full moon was rising outside, and somehow the machines, the clocks, the deaths, everything was connected. I was beginning to understand the weight of history this room carried. By the time I returned to room 404, the team had packed up, convinced it was just a glitch. But I could feel something shifting in my bones. The last person left, and I found myself alone. I stood there listening to the silence, the same silence that had engulfed the hospital before the code blue was called. Suddenly I felt it, just a whisper of cold air against my skin. I looked up at the ceiling, and there it was, a shadow, like a passing figure, flickering in the dim light. It was the kind of thing you could easily dismiss as imagination, until you felt the hair on your neck rise. Until you realized the hospital had grown quiet, again too quiet. No machines beeping, no footsteps, just the quiet hum of the building itself. I closed my eyes, heart pounding. Somewhere deep within the hospital's old bones, something was watching, waiting, and whatever it was had made its presence known right here in room 404. When the full moon rises again, who knows what will happen next? Story 3, the elevator that goes nowhere. The clock read 3:33 a.m. in the dimly lit maintenance office tucked away in the basement of Riverside Hospital's north wing. The place was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint sound of ventilation working its way through endless corridors. I leaned back in my creaky chair, running a hand through my hair. Another late-night shift, and I'd gotten used to it by now. Long hours, not much excitement, just the usual maintenance tasks that no one else wanted to handle. The elevator systems were part of my responsibility, and it was that damn elevator that would make this night unforgettable. I'd heard the rumor staff gossip, whispers in hallways. It wasn't unusual for old places like this to get creepy at night. Riverside had been around for decades, and with age came oddities, quirks, and strange things that happened when the place was left to itself. Cold spots, strange sounds in walls, flickering lights, the usual haunted nonsense, but they never bothered me. Not until that night. I'd just finished checking maintenance logs when my radio crackled to life. The night shift nurse sounded shaky, like she'd seen something that rattled her. "The elevator's been acting up. Keeps stopping on the 7th floor. You need to check it out." The 7th floor. That floor had been shut down for years, closed for renovations that never actually happened. Just locked up and abandoned. Rumor had it the floor was sealed after some incident decades ago, but no one could remember the details. I grabbed my toolbox and headed to the elevator, my boots echoing in the empty corridor louder than they should have. The north wing was an old beast, and the elevator system was equally ancient, creaking and groaning when it moved, like a symphony of mechanical sounds that made it seem almost alive. When I reached the elevator, the doors stood open, and the indicator showed it had stopped on the 7th floor again. That wasn't normal. I pressed the call button, and as I did, the lights flickered once, twice, before returning to steady illumination. The elevator descended to my level, and I could hear machinery humming somewhere above. But nothing seemed out of place until the doors slid open. I stepped inside, ready to investigate whatever malfunction was causing it to stop on a non-existent floor. The smell of stale air filled the small space as I hit the button for the 7th floor, curious to see if this was just a system glitch. As the doors slid shut, the small light above the panel blinked and went dark. A strange feeling washed over me, the kind you get when something isn't right, but you can't identify what. The elevator jerked, its old mechanisms groaning in protest, but it started moving upward. The ride felt longer than usual, and the air grew colder, chilled almost to the point of discomfort. The lights flickered again, casting harsh shadows across the walls. When I reached the 7th floor, the doors opened to reveal darkness too dark. The kind of darkness that felt thick, heavy, like it was trying to swallow everything around it. There was no reason for the lights to be out on a floor that was supposedly just closed for renovation. I peered into the blackness, my breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. I was about to step out when the elevator doors suddenly slammed shut, trapping me inside. The lights blinked again, and the elevator lurched upward with a violent jolt. My stomach dropped as it started moving erratically between floors, no longer the usual slow ascent, but quick and unpredictable. I punched the emergency stop button, but nothing happened. The cold was unbearable now, seeping into my bones, and the metallic sounds of the elevator's mechanics were joined by something else, a soft scraping sound, almost like nails on chalkboard, but deeper, more resonant. I swallowed hard. This wasn't right. The elevator jerked to a stop, this time in complete darkness, an absolute silence, the kind that made every breath feel too loud. Panic began creeping in, but I forced myself to focus, pulling out my phone to use as a flashlight. As the faint beam cut through the darkness, I noticed something odd. A set of old blueprints, rolled up, lying on the floor near the corner of the elevator. I didn't remember them being there before. Curious and desperate for any explanation, I unrolled the paper. It was a blueprint of the hospital, or at least, it was supposed to be. As I traced the lines with my finger, something stood out. A hidden ward, rooms that didn't exist on any official plans, and it wasn't just storage space or forgotten offices. The annotations on the blueprint described experimental treatments, observation rooms, words that made my stomach twist. As I read through them, my heart hammered in my chest. I realized what this meant. The cold, the sounds, the malfunctioning elevator. Something had happened here, something the hospital wanted to forget. The scraping sound returned, but this time it wasn't coming from the elevator walls. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing, just empty darkness. My breath came in shallow gasps, hands shaking as I wiped sweat from my brow. I had to get out. I had to escape whatever was trapped in that hidden ward. With a final desperate effort, I slammed my palm against the panel. The elevator jolted to life, beginning its slow descent, and I gripped the sides to steady myself. When it finally reached the ground floor, I rushed out, running for the nearest exit, heart still racing. I never spoke about what I found. No one would have believed me anyway. The hospital kept everything under wraps, but every time I pass the north wing, I feel the weight of what happened on the 7th floor. And every time I step into that elevator, I swear I hear the scraping sound again, just beneath the hum of machinery. I know deep down that something is still trapped up there. Something that never made it out.